Should someone's personal trauma qualify them to be able to coach other people on how to work through their own trauma? Well, if you've watched any number of videos here on my channel, you probably know my answer to this question, but if you're new here, hello and welcome to my channel. Well, my views on the coaching industry, which at one point in time were quite cynical, I will say that they have evolved over the course of the past 3 years of making content here on YouTube. However, one thing that I will never change my mind on is the fact that a life coach who takes a 2-weekend trauma certification and or themselves has experienced significant trauma that they were able to overcome will not ever qualify them to be able to sell coaching to someone else to help that person overcome their trauma. And in saying that, there still seems to be a trend of people on the internet who consider themselves trauma coaches and have, in my opinion, delusionally convinced themselves that they are in fact qualified to be playing with people's trauma. And while I don't know these people, I don't know their intentions, they might have the best intentions in the world, but good intentions are not a substitute for actual legitimate clinical training. I would love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments before we get into the story today, but I just really think that these coaches leveraging things like intimacy, connection, and shared experience in order to profit off the fact that somebody else has experienced trauma in their life makes me really angry and upset, because you're basically not only taking advantage of people who are in an incredibly vulnerable situation, but in many cases, I would assume you're actually making their situation much worse. And so before we actually get into reading today's story, I want to dive a little bit deeper into this subject, which isn't something I normally do, but this is one that I am particularly passionate about. And I think it's important that we have this conversation about why using personal trauma as a credential to then sell coaching to help other people work through their trauma is incredibly harmful and problematic. Trauma work through the lens of psychotherapy or even social work tends to have a very specific meaning. It often involves formal education, supervised practice, ethics boards, and a deep understanding of how to safely support someone through psychological pain. But in coaching, from my personal observations, the stories that I've listened to from other people, and the countless threads available all over the internet on people's horrific experiences, the concept of trauma work in coaching is constantly being thrown around by people who have done a single weekend or week-long course, or they themselves have experienced their own trauma and now suddenly feel qualified to help other people work through their trauma. When someone turns to a coach to help them with their trauma, a coach who in particular is not properly trained, there is no one there to catch the red flags, if you will. There are no tools available to identify if re-traumatization is occurring. In many cases, from the stories I've heard, there's no understanding of boundaries, of codependency, or if transference is taking place. And I think in many circumstances, the coaches don't actually have the right toolkit, the right skill set to be able to actually help people process the emotions that come up when they're having these conversations about traumatic instances that have happened to them or traumatic situations that they've dealt with. And so because they don't have the tools to help that individual process that, this person is kind of left to feel all these big emotions and to deal with the fallout of that with no assistance to help them move forward. And so I just really think that if you are someone who is experiencing trauma or has experienced trauma and you're looking for the guidance you need in order to be able to work through or overcome that trauma, paying someone upwards of $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, which we're about to hear in this story, can be a really unfortunate way to land yourself back into the pathway of harm and arguably even more trauma. It's truly horrific that people are doing this, and I don't think that I can stress that enough. And so with all that being said, when it comes to trauma specifically, I will always be an advocate for proper mental health assistance, i.e. a registered, licensed therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, etc. And while I know some of you are likely going to have the argument of, well, therapists can do harm too, and I'm not here to say that they don't. No profession is immune to unethical behavior. I completely understand that. But the difference is, again, allegedly in my opinion, therapists are accountable. They have licensing boards. They operate operate under legal and ethical frameworks. If a therapist causes you harm as a client, you have recourse to file a complaint. In coaching, there's nothing. There's no license, there's no regulatory body. There's not even a requirement for them to stop practicing if it is proven that they have caused harm to their clients. I mean, how many times have we seen coaches blow up their business, completely decide to ghost for a little bit, and then come back to the internet as if nothing happened, as a whole new business offering a whole new service and taking zero accountability? And so when it comes to this conversation around trauma specifically, is there a chance that a therapist could cause harm? Sure. But what systems exist to protect people if that is the case? That's the thing that I want you to consider here in this conversation. And I really just want to stress that with the coaching industry, specifically when it comes to coaches who feel able to help people work through their trauma, a lot of the time, what I've observed as happening here is just charisma, vibes, and marketing. And let me just tell you that while vibes can be very convincing, they can often leave you in a very vulnerable position. Okay, so this particular story was submitted to the coaching scam story submission form linked in the description of every single one of my videos. I wanted to share my own story about working with this coach, Jane Doe. Her story is typical of the because I went through trauma, I will coach you about trauma, which I didn't see then because I was so deep in my trauma, but I definitely see it now. That's the thing too that I want to address here is that I never want to blame or shame anyone for falling prey to one of these schemes or one of these, trauma-informed coaches, because I really don't think that the client is liable when you are in that vulnerable of a position to need to distrust someone or believe that they are not operating within your best interest, particularly when they are making grandiose claims or promises that they're going to help you overcome whatever struggle you're facing as a result of your trauma. And so while I can sit here in my house and be like,
oh, don't fall for one of these trauma informed coaches,
I know that that is easier said than done when you are in a vulnerable position and you maybe aren't able to think critically and do your due diligence. So I just want to put that on the record before we continue. She has worked with big name coaches such as one of arguably the most manipulative coaches of all time who will not be named. My story of working with her stems back to when I was dealing with getting over some big traumatic things in my life and wanted to be in community with other women. I was also deep in the coaching pyramid world and lived and breathed coaching. This is another interesting piece too that I'm not sure I've really ever addressed here on the channel, but I do believe that if you are someone who actively is a coach yourself and you have a coaching business, you are likely, based on my own personal experience, much more susceptible to believing that a coach is going to be the solution to your problem. So if I'm a coach, I have my own coaching business and I want help growing my coaching business, I'm probably more likely to hire a business coach than a regular business owner outside of coaching would be. Similarly, if I'm a coach that has a coaching business and I'm looking for support in my personal life or my fitness goals, I'm probably much more likely to hire a life coach or a fitness coach versus someone who's outside the industry. I don't have the stats on this, but I would hazard to guess that the number one customer of any type of coaching is someone who they themselves identifies as a coach. I just don't think the market for coaching from regular people, aka anyone outside the industry, is as high as those who are in the industry. And of course, as always, this is my anecdotal opinion based on conversations I've had, so you can let me know if you disagree in the comments. I just think knowing the people I know in the coaching industry and knowing the people I know who aren't in the coaching industry, the ones who are involved in coaching are the ones who either already have a coach or I think would be more likely to then hire a coach. And so I say all that to say that if this person was in the coaching industry and then was looking for someone to help them overcome their trauma, it's not surprising that they would look to a coach to help them solve that problem. What I didn't intend was spending up to $30,000 to $40,000 in total in all of her different programs. Thinking both that she would help me heal, her signature program back then was over and over again about healing and being trauma informed, and that people who have been traumatized wouldn't have to heal alone. Okay, one more thing that I want to address here that I don't think I mentioned in the intro to this video is that there is a big difference between being trauma informed and being actually trained in helping people process their trauma. And I think that the coaching industry in particular is notorious for not understanding that differentiation. Like when I was a yoga teacher, I was a trauma informed yoga teacher, meaning that I could teach a yoga class in mind of particular cues and positions that might be triggering for individuals who suffered from PTSD. That's not to say that I'm able to teach yoga to help people heal their PTSD so much as I can be mindful of how I'm instructing so as not to re-traumatize people if they're in my yoga class. And so I always find it interesting when I see coaches conflating the concept of being trauma informed with being actually skilled to help people process trauma. And I think that that's a really important thing to explain. The cringiest part now, looking back and slightly mind trippy, was how she keeps on misusing the word intimacy. In any context, most intimacy suggests emotional or physical closeness between romantic partners. This coach, Jane, would use intimacy to promote her services for women, saying that they can learn to be more intimate with their lives, aka to be closer to themselves or something like that. Oh, would you look at that? A coach rewriting the definition for a word that already has a definition. Huh, we've never seen that before, have we? To me, this just seems like the classic form of co-opting something into a super vague and spiritualized definition. But if you look really close, there isn't really a clear definition there. And that's kind of the point. You know, it's all smoke and mirrors, if you will. Like we take a word that already has deep emotional meaning. We stretch that meaning into something completely different and unrecognizable. And then we use that definition to package it into a coaching offer that we can sell to you for probably $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. And so suddenly, if you find yourself unable to establish this intimate connection with yourself, what are you going to do? Oh, obviously, conveniently, I'm going to buy this coaching program that promises to solve this problem that I didn't even know I had until 5 minutes ago when you pointed it out. It's incredible. It's truly, truly incredible. I'm in awe of the creativity here, folks. I take full accountability for my fault for signing up for this stuff, but looking back, it is scary how someone who literally got a PhD in women's studies became part of the funnel of teaching non-therapist women to serve very traumatized people. I feel like every time I hear a story similar to this, as we have heard many here on the channel, I will link the playlist here. One thing I have learned over the course of the past few years, making this content, commenting on the coaching industry, reading tons and tons of stories, speaking with individuals who have been impacted by the industry, both positively and negatively, the one thing that remains true in 99.9% of these stories is that the coaching industry is always going to reward storytelling and not actual outcomes. If I can lead you to believe that I have the solution to your problem, you are going to pay me money and I am going to benefit financially. I am so sick of it and I absolutely hate it here. All that to say, thank you so much to the individual that shared this story. I think it is super important that we have these conversations, not only so we can hold these people accountable, but also, more importantly, so that we can prevent people in future from falling prey to these absolute grifters. If you have a story of your experience being harmed by an individual in the coaching industry, like I mentioned before, the form where you can submit it is linked in the description down below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. And I'm going to leave you on screen here with an interview from a couple of months ago with a woman who actually lost her partner to a coaching scam. So you can go ahead and give that a watch if you haven't seen it already. Take care, comb your hair. I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye.